On my 63rd birthday, I showed up with a homemade cake and a smile. My daughter-in-law was already sitting at the head of the table, my seat. My son didn't even look at me when he pointed toward the kids' table. That was the moment I decided. He's out of the will. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe. And please tell me and others, what's one life lesson everyone should hear before it's too late? Share it in the comments below. Thanks. I wore my nicest blouse, fixed my hair the way Daniel used to say made me look like a TV anchor, and baked myself a small strawberry cake because no one had mentioned dessert. I figured I'd show up, smile, and pretend it didn't bother me that my son and his wife hadn't returned my last 3 calls. It was my 63rd birthday. I had no expectations, just hope. When I arrived, Emily answered the door, barely glanced at me, then turned to shout something about napkins. The dining room was already full. I stood for a second in the doorway, cake in my hands, scanning the table. That's when I saw it. Emily was sitting in my seat, at the head of the table, where I'd always sat during birthdays, holidays, anniversaries. Daniel was next to her, laughing at something on his phone. A few people turned and smiled politely, but no one moved. "Hey, Mom," Daniel said without looking up. "Just pull up a chair. There's space in the back." I walked toward the table, still unsure if I'd heard him right. Then Emily gestured casually toward the side room. "We set up a little table for the kids. It's got plastic cups and coloring books. Thought it'd be more fun, you know?" My eyes followed her finger and landed on a flimsy fold-up table where 3 toddlers were slamming spoons into plates of boxed mac and cheese. At first I thought she was joking. Then Daniel nodded. "It's easier this way. You can sit with Jason's twins." My stomach dropped. "The kids' table?" I said quietly. Emily laughed. "It's not a big deal. It's just logistics. There wasn't room here?" I looked around. There were 2 empty chairs at the main table. One had a purse on it. The other had a folded napkin. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for my seat back. I walked over to the folding table, placed the cake down, and sat on a plastic chair half my size. The children ignored me, too young to notice anything. Daniel raised a toast from the other room, clinking glasses with Emily. They didn't mention me, not even once. No "happy birthday, Mom," not even a look. I ate in silence, picking at cold mashed potatoes while Emily talked about their upcoming trip to Mexico. One of the toddlers spilled juice on my shoe. I cleaned it up with a napkin and didn't say a word. After dinner, I went into the kitchen to collect my cake. No one had touched it. The candles were still in the box. I slipped it back into the container, said my goodbyes to no one in particular, and walked out. The night was quiet. I drove home, without turning the radio on. My house was cold, the kind of cold that feels like it's sitting inside your bones. I put the untouched cake in the fridge, took off my earrings, and walked into the small room where I kept my important documents. I opened the safe. Inside was my will, written 10 years ago, back when Daniel used to call me every Sunday and thank me for raising him right, back when I believed he'd always protect me. I pulled it out, placed it on the kitchen table, and stared at it under the overhead light. I thought of every meal I'd cooked for him, every dollar I'd scraped to put him through school, every night I sat up with him while he cried over broken friendships or stressful exams. And now I was a joke at a plastic table, an afterthought, less than a guest. That's when I knew. It wasn't just a bad dinner. It wasn't just a thoughtless mistake. It was the final signal I needed. I folded the old will neatly, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote one word across the front in ink: void. The birthday wasn't the first sign, just the most obvious one. Looking back, I could trace the start of it all to the moment Emily moved in. At first, I thought she was just shy. She didn't hug me when we met, but some people aren't huggers. She called me Mrs. Allen for the first 2 years, which felt odd, but I didn't push. I tried to make her feel welcome. I cooked her favorites when she visited, always offered to help with errands, even let her pick the curtains in Daniel's old room when they turned it into a guest space. I wanted her to know she was family. But little by little, things started disappearing. The framed photo of Daniel and me on his college graduation day vanished from the hallway. I found it stuffed in a drawer under expired coupons. The holiday. Traditions we'd kept for years, cooking pierogies on Christmas Eve, movie marathons on Thanksgiving morning, suddenly got replaced. "We're doing something different this year," Emily would announce, with Daniel silently nodding behind her. I never argued. I just brought a pie or a small gift and kept my mouth shut. But it kept getting worse. One spring, I stopped by unannounced with a basket of fresh herbs from my garden. Emily opened the door, looked down at the basket, and said, "Oh, we don't really do organic, but thanks." She never took the basket, just left me standing there. I went home and sat in my kitchen for 20 minutes, trying to convince myself it wasn't personal. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe she didn't like basil. But then came the photo incident. I had given Emily and Daniel, my mother's, china set as a wedding gift, vintage porcelain with hand-painted roses that had survived 3 generations. One day, I asked Emily if I could borrow one of the teacups for a garden club tea party. She looked confused. "What china set?" she said. I described it. She blinked, then shrugged. "Oh, that? I thought you didn't want it anymore." "I donated it." I nodded slowly, said I understood. That night I checked Facebook Marketplace. There it was, listed under her name, $50 for the whole set. I didn't say anything to Daniel. I told myself it was just a thing, just porcelain. Not worth a fight. But it stayed with me, because it wasn't about the dishes. It was about the story she was writing, one where I never existed. Every time I visited after that, I noticed more things had changed. The kitchen smelled different, like synthetic candles instead of garlic and onions. The couch I'd helped pick out was gone. Even Jason, my grandson, had stopped asking to sit in my lap. He clung to Emily, and when I reached out, he hesitated. I tried to pretend it didn't hurt. I still brought gifts, still asked about his classes, still folded laundry when no one asked me to. But every conversation with Emily was sharp-edged. She'd ask passive questions like, "Are you still driving? Isn't it getting risky at your age?" Or, "Do you ever think about retirement homes? Some of them are really nice now." Daniel never interrupted. He just looked down or stepped into the next room. Once, I asked him quietly if everything was okay between us. He said, "You're imagining things, Mom. Don't be dramatic." Dramatic. That's what he called it when I asked why I wasn't invited to their daughter's ballet recital. He said it was a scheduling error, but I knew better. Everyone else got an invite. I saw the pictures online. I was just never meant to be in them. And so I stopped asking. I visited less. I sent birthday cards and Christmas gifts, but I stopped dropping by. No one noticed. No one asked why. The silence settled like dust in an empty room. It wasn't one moment that broke me. It was all of them. Every erased photo, every ignored message, every time Emily rolled her eyes when I spoke. I told myself it was okay. I was still the mother, still the reason Daniel had everything he did. I just had to keep the peace. That's what mothers do, right? But deep down, something had already started changing. A quiet shift, a seed of clarity. I hadn't lost my seat at the table. I had been slowly pushed out of the entire room. The day I found my mother's china set listed online under Emily's account, something cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet snap inside, like a thread that finally gave out. I didn't comment, didn't call, didn't even ask for it back. I just stared at the photos. There it was, the delicate porcelain tea set I grew up watching my mother handle with reverence, reduced to 10 poorly lit images and a $50 price tag. The description said, "Vintage junk, no returns." That was my history. That was Emily's caption. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, and tried to remember the last time I'd seen Daniel alone. It had been over a year. Every time I visited, Emily hovered. Every time I called, she answered. If he did pick up, his voice was clipped, distracted, always followed by a text. "Sorry, was in the middle of something." The last time we'd had lunch together, I had brought up the idea of us going on a road trip like we used to, just him and me, maybe drive up to the mountains, visit that old diner we loved. He smiled awkwardly and said, "I don't think Emily would be into that," as if his wife needed to approve his mother-son time. I should have said something then, but I didn't. I smiled and changed the subject to Jason's school. Always safer to talk about Jason. Always better to keep it light. But after the china, I couldn't stop seeing it. How many pieces of me had quietly vanished over the years? The old books I'd given Daniel from his childhood? Gone. The quilt I made for their wedding? Never seen it again. The recipe binder I'd passed down, handwritten with family meals? Emily prefers Pinterest, Daniel had said once, laughing. When I finally tried to talk to him, really talk, he didn't even pretend to listen. I waited until Emily had taken Jason to swim class. I called Daniel, asked him if we could meet. He agreed. We sat in a coffee shop near his office. I remember the smell of burnt espresso and the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. I told him I was feeling pushed out, that things felt different, that I missed him. I asked why I wasn't invited to family dinners anymore, why Emily rolled her eyes every time I spoke, why it felt like I was being erased. He took a sip of his latte and said, "Mom, you're reading into things too much. You've always been a little intense about family stuff." Intense? He said it like it was a flaw, like caring too much was an embarrassment. I asked about the china. He frowned. "Emily said you gave it to Goodwill." I told him the truth, that it was listed online. He shrugged. "Maybe she didn't know. It's just stuff. Just stuff." I looked at my son and realized he no longer saw the difference between memory and clutter, between legacy and junk. I asked him one last question, if he thought I was imagining all of it. He didn't answer, just stared at his coffee, then checked his watch and said he had a meeting soon. I nodded, stood up and left without finishing my tea. That night, I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out the folder marked Estate. Inside were copies of my will, documents from the bank, old insurance records. I ran my fingers across the line that read, Beneficiary Daniel Allen. 10 years ago, I thought I was giving him a future. Now, it felt like handing a matchbook to someone standing beside dry timber. I didn't cry. Not anymore. I just reached for my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and tapped a name I hadn't used in years. Melissa, my niece, my sister's daughter. She answered on the second ring. "Aunt Ruth?" she said, surprised. I told her I was thinking of updating my will and wanted to ask her something. She didn't hesitate. "Of course, whatever you need. No questions, no suspicion, just warmth." The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer, and by the end of the week, Daniel Allen's name was removed from every document that once secured his future. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't anger, it was survival. It was me making sure that everything I had spent a lifetime building didn't end up in the hands of people who saw me as disposable. It was the first time in years I felt in control. I looked at the fresh stack of documents on my desk and whispered to no one, "This is how you protect yourself when the people you raised forget how to love you." The lawyer didn't ask questions when I called. He remembered me from a decade ago when I'd first created the will after Daniel got his first real job, and I thought the hard part of life was over. Back then, I'd walked into his office with a binder full of plans. I'd left everything to Daniel, my house, my savings, even the antique piano that had belonged to my grandmother. It made sense. He was my only child, my blood, the one person I thought would carry my story forward. But sitting in that office now, with the original will spread open between us and a new document waiting for signatures, I felt nothing but clarity. I asked the lawyer if Melissa could be named the new beneficiary for everything. The house, the savings, the possessions, all of it. He paused, then said gently, "Just to be clear, are you sure you don't want to leave anything to your son?" I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I already gave him everything that mattered." He didn't keep it. He didn't ask again. The process was quick. Melissa's name was added. Daniel's was removed. I signed where I needed to, initialed every page, and left with a new folder in my bag and a strange weight off my chest. I didn't tell anyone. Not Melissa, not my friends, not even the neighbor who always lingered by the mailbox hoping for gossip. I wanted silence. I wanted space to let the decision settle inside me before anyone could touch it. Over the next few days, I found myself pulling away from everything connected to Daniel's life. I stopped checking his wife's social media. I deleted the shortcut I had saved for Jason's school blog. I even removed the folder of photos I'd kept on my desktop, the ones of birthday parties, recitals, and Sunday dinners. I didn't delete them. I just moved them into a hard drive and locked it in my filing cabinet. Some part of me still hoped, still ached, but the rest of me needed air. I cleaned my house like I was prepping for an inspection. Scrubbed baseboards, dusted bookshelves, rearranged the pantry. I needed to move. I needed to feel useful. But no matter how many drawers I organized, I couldn't shake the ache that lingered in my chest every time I remembered Daniel's face that day in the coffee shop. How indifferent he looked. How small I must have seemed to him. Then, 2 weeks after the will rewrite, the phone rang. It was Daniel. His tone was light, casual, like nothing had happened. "Hey, Mom. Hope you're doing okay. Emily and I were wondering, any chance you could help with the kids next month? We're planning a cruise. Just 7 days. You'd have the whole house to yourself. Plenty of snacks. Jason's pretty independent now." I stared at the phone, not saying anything. 7 days. He wanted me to watch the kids so he and Emily could drink cocktails on a boat while pretending I didn't exist the other 358 days of the year. I waited for a please. It never came. I asked, "Why me?" He chuckled. "You're still Grandma, right? You're the only one they're comfortable with." I said no. Just that. One word. No. He paused. Then I heard him exhale through his nose, like I was being difficult. "Okay, well, I guess we'll figure something out." He didn't ask if I was feeling all right. He didn't say he missed me. He didn't even ask why I sounded so cold. He just hung up. I placed the phone back on the receiver and stood in the kitchen, staring at the refrigerator where Jason's crayon drawings used to hang. I had taken them down last year when Emily rolled her eyes and called them clutter. That call wasn't a test. It was a confirmation. He didn't care. He didn't notice. He didn't love me the way I had spent a lifetime loving him. I went to my room, packed a small suitcase, and booked a room at a quiet motel an hour out of town. I left no note, no text, no explanation. I just needed to vanish for a while. Let the silence do the talking. Let the emptiness I had felt in their presence finally echo loud enough to be heard. I needed distance, not just from Daniel and Emily, but from the version of me who had tolerated so much just to be tolerated in return. The motel was small, the kind of place that still used real keys and had floral bedspreads faded from too many washes. The woman at the front desk handed me the key without asking questions. I told her I might stay a few nights, maybe a week. She nodded and slid a takeout menu across the counter. I didn't unpack much, just a few changes of clothes, a paperback novel I never opened, and a photo I kept in my wallet. Daniel, at 8 years old, standing on the beach with jelly on his chin and both hands raised in victory over a half-built sandcastle. I propped it against the lamp on the nightstand, then lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The silence was loud. No dishes clinking, no phones ringing, no one asking for anything. It was the first time in years I hadn't been on call for someone else's convenience. I didn't cry. I didn't feel free either. I just felt still. That night, I microwaved a plastic tray of pasta and sat by the window watching the neon vacancy sign flicker. Somewhere between bites, I realized something that made my stomach twist. If I had said yes to Daniel's cruise request, I would have been back in that house, sleeping in a guest room that used to be mine, watching Jason while Emily sent selfies from the pool. I would have cleaned their kitchen, folded their laundry, and left before anyone said thank you. They didn't want me there because they loved me. They wanted me there because I was useful, a reliable, unpaid, invisible resource. That thought stayed with me like a bitter taste. In the morning, I went out for coffee and sat on a park bench with a notepad. I made a list of everything I had done for Daniel over the years. Just a memory exercise, I told myself. Nothing petty. I started with the big things, working double shifts to pay for his braces, skipping vacations to afford his college, selling my jewelry to help with his wedding. Then I added the small things. Ironing his shirts for his first job interview, sewing his Halloween costumes, staying up late to bake his favorite lemon squares before exams. The list filled the page. I turned it over and kept writing. And then, in a separate column, I tried to list what he had done for me. It was shorter. Much shorter. Some birthday cards. A dinner once, 3 years ago. A scarf I never wore because Emily made a face when I opened it. I didn't write those things to punish myself. I wrote them to see the truth on paper, to look at the imbalance and finally call it what it was. I was the one holding the relationship up. Always had been. I went back to the motel and called Melissa. She picked up with a cheerful, "Hi, Aunt Ruth." I didn't explain everything. I just told her I might come visit soon, and she sounded genuinely excited. I asked if she needed anything, and she laughed. "You're the one who should be asking that, not me." Her voice was a balm I didn't realize I needed. I hung up feeling lighter. Later that night, Daniel texted. It was short. Everything. "Okay?" No punctuation. No warmth. I didn't respond. An hour later, he called. I let it ring. Then the voicemail pinged. "Hey, Mom. Just wondering where you are. Emily said you didn't answer earlier. We're gonna need to know if you're still free next weekend. Let us know soon, okay?" That was it. No, "I miss you." No, "Are you all right?" Just a deadline for babysitting. I deleted the voicemail. Then I blocked his number. I didn't feel angry. I felt done. Not the dramatic slam the door kind of done. The quiet kind. The kind where the door doesn't slam because it's already closed, and no one's left standing behind it. I turned off the lamp, crawled into bed, and stared at the ceiling again. Only this time, I wasn't waiting for a call. I wasn't hoping for an apology. I was letting the silence stretch, letting it settle in my bones. And for the first time in a long, long while, I let myself fall asleep without checking my phone. The first time they moved me out of my own bedroom, they called it temporary. Jason had just started kindergarten. Emily was overwhelmed, and they said the guest room would be more convenient for the nanny. I wasn't even upset. I offered, in fact. I told them I'd take the smaller room at the end of the hall. It didn't bother me then. I thought it was helping. But then the smaller room became Emily's craft studio. Then it became her home office. Then it became a walk-in closet. I remember walking in once, hoping to grab an extra blanket, only to find the bed gone and the walls lined with shelves of shoes and handbags. Daniel stood behind me, hands in his pockets, avoiding my eyes. I said nothing. I just turned around and walked to the garage. That's where they told me I could stay for now. "We'll insulate it," Emily promised. "Add a heater and a little rug. It'll be cozy, like a studio apartment." I nodded. My voice was stuck somewhere between shame and disbelief. That winter was brutal. I slept next to a stack of moving boxes and a tool rack wrapped in 2 blankets and a sweater. There were mice, too. I heard them at night, scratching behind the drywall. I told Daniel once. He said he'd look into it. Nothing changed. The next summer, they hosted a barbecue. I offered to help cook, and Emily said, "Maybe just stay inside. Don't want you getting overheated out here." Inside meant the garage. I spent the afternoon folding towels and listening to laughter through the wall. At one point, I peeked through the window and saw them all crowded around a fire pit, roasting marshmallows, Daniel with Jason on his lap. I used to be part of those nights. Now I was folding linens beside a lawnmower. When I brought it up, gently, Daniel sighed. "You know Emily's under a lot of stress, Mom. Can't you just not make things harder?" That line stuck with me. Not make things harder, as if my existence was an obstacle. Over time, I stopped asking for space in the house. I kept my things in bins. I used the garage fridge even when the kitchen one was empty. I washed my own dishes in the laundry sink. It was easier that way. Less tension, less eye-rolling, less pretending. I started calling the garage my place like a joke. "Back to my place," I'd say with a laugh when dinner was over. No one ever laughed with me. Eventually, Emily suggested I get a mini fridge for snacks so I wouldn't have to come inside so much. I nodded and bought one, then a kettle, then a space heater. Piece by piece, I built a life in a concrete box that smelled like motor oil and mildew. And Daniel let it happen. He didn't push back. He didn't say, "This is too much." He just stood by while his wife took over every inch of space that used to belong to both of us. I told myself it was just a phase, that they were young, that once Jason grew older, maybe things would settle. But 5 years passed. Jason went from crayons to video games. Emily's closet expanded. Daniel stopped even knocking before coming into the garage. He'd just barge in like it was still part of the house. I realized I had become part of the house, too. Not family, just another fixture, something functional and out of the way. Then came the final straw. A neighbor, someone I barely knew, stopped me on the sidewalk and said, "Oh, you're Emily's mother, right? The one who lives out back?" Out back, Not Ruth, not Daniel's mom. Just a vague accessory to someone else's life. I smiled politely and said no. I'm just the tenant, I told her. Garage apartment. I walked home that day and didn't go inside. I opened the garage, sat down on the folding chair next to my kettle, and stared at the cement floor. This wasn't temporary. It was never meant to be temporary. It was erasure, disguised as compromise, wrapped in guilt and silence and low expectations. I looked around that garage, at the plastic drawers, the cold lamp, the stack of empty boxes that never got thrown away, and I realized the truth. They didn't think of me as family anymore. I was just storage, tucked away and quiet, easy to ignore, but not for much longer. I was sweeping the garage one morning, pushing dust around the concrete floor like it might make the place feel more like a room and less like what it really was, when Daniel knocked on the side door. He didn't come in, just stood there with his hands in his coat pockets, looking like he'd practiced whatever he was about to say. "Hey, Mom, got a minute?" I nodded and stepped aside. He looked around like he was seeing the space for the first time. "Emily and I were talking," he started, "and, we had an idea. Just wanted to run it by you." I didn't say anything, just waited. He scratched the back of his neck, a habit he picked up as a teenager whenever he was about to say something he knew might not land well. "So, the house," he said. "Yours, I mean. It's been sitting there empty, right? I mean, we know you love it and all, but you're barely using it. Emily thinks it might be time to consider something more manageable, like an apartment closer to us, something easier to maintain. Less, space." I blinked slowly. "You mean downsizing?" He smiled like I'd said the magic word. "Exactly. Downsizing. I mean, the market's good right now. You could get a great price. And if you don't want to live alone anymore, there's that senior community Emily's mom toured last year. Really clean, quiet. They even have a little gardening club." He paused, waiting for a reaction. I stared at him, expressionless, then asked, "And what would happen to the house?" His smile wavered. "Well, we could help take care of it. Keep it in the family. Maybe even move in. Jason's getting older. More space would be good. And you'd be right nearby. Easier for holidays, help with the kids, all that." I nodded slowly, as if considering it. But inside, something icy settled behind my ribs. He wasn't offering me help. He was offering me a trade, my independence for their convenience, my history for their future, my home, the only thing I had left that was truly mine, now seen as an obstacle. I thought about the years I'd spent scrubbing floors, budgeting groceries down to the cent, skipping dinners so Daniel could go to college with new shoes and a full lunchbox. I thought about the promises, the reassurances, the quiet erasures. I thought about the garage, and I smiled. "Let me think about it," I said. "That's all I'm asking," he replied, relieved. "Just think about it." That night, I didn't sleep in the garage. I packed a small bag and drove to my real home, the house they wanted, the one I had paid off over 30 years, slowly, steadily, with every check I earned cleaning hotel rooms and folding laundry for strangers. I walked through the empty rooms, touched the walls, opened drawers, ran my hands along the piano bench, where Daniel used to sit and mash keys when he was 4. Dust had settled, but the bones of the house were still strong. Mine. I stayed up past midnight, sitting at the kitchen table with the will in front of me, reading every page again. I made one last call to the lawyer in the morning, finalized everything, locked it in, sealed copies in 3 envelopes, one for my records, one for Melissa, and one for safe deposit. I labeled them in bold black ink. No changes without written authorization. Irrevocable unless I say otherwise. I put the house back in order, cleaned it top to bottom, bought fresh sheets, filled the fridge. Then I went to the nursery and picked up a small lavender plant for the kitchen window, just like I used to keep. I wanted the place to feel like me again, and it did. It felt like a woman lived there, not a storage box, not a spare set of hands, not a burden, just a woman with a name, a history, and a right to dignity. When Daniel texted me 3 days later to follow up on our downsizing chat, I didn't reply. I didn't need to. My silence was the answer, and my will was the Protection I should have drawn up years ago. It happened in the middle of a community dance class. 1 second I was swaying to a slow waltz. The next my knees buckled and everything turned black. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed with a monitor beeping beside me and a nurse adjusting something on the IV. My head throbbed, but I was conscious. I asked what had happened. She said I'd fainted, probably from low blood sugar or stress. Nothing serious. I was stable. She smiled and told me to rest. I closed my eyes and exhaled. It wasn't death. It was just a pause. But apparently, the rumor spread before the truth caught up. By the time I was moved to a private room that evening, I heard hushed voices outside my door. Then it opened. Daniel walked in first, followed by Emily, and behind them a man in a suit holding a briefcase. A lawyer, their lawyer. They didn't look relieved. They looked caught off guard. Emily's eyes widened when she saw me sitting up, fully alert, sipping from a plastic cup of apple juice. "You're awake," she said slowly. "You're okay." Daniel forced a chuckle. "They said you were unconscious. We were worried." He didn't bring flowers. He didn't sit down. He looked toward the lawyer like waiting for a signal. I stared at the man in the suit, then back at Daniel. "Thought I died?" I asked. My voice was hoarse but calm. Emily let out a tight laugh. "Of course not. We just wanted to make sure your affairs were in order. You know, just in case." The lawyer cleared his throat and stepped forward. But I raised my hand. "You can leave," I told him. "This isn't your jurisdiction anymore." Daniel looked confused. "What are you talking about?" I turned to him fully. "My estate. My will. It's been changed. Months ago." Emily stepped forward, her smile brittle. "You didn't tell us." "Wasn't required," I said. "Didn't think you'd be interested." The lawyer hesitated, then nodded slightly and stepped back into the hallway. Emily looked like she wanted to scream. Daniel's jaw clenched. "Mom, what's going on?" I sipped more juice. "You were planning to handle my assets before." "Confirming if I was alive. That's what's going on." His face flushed. "That's not fair." "Neither was the garage," I said. "Neither was the kids' table. Neither was asking me to sell my house while you kept making space for her handbags." Emily turned red. "That's not how it was. You're twisting things." "No," I said, calm and firm. "I'm finally seeing them clearly." Daniel looked at the floor. "So what now? You're cutting us off?" "No," I said. "I already did." He took a step closer. "Mom, we can fix this. Whatever you think." "We did. We can talk about it." "I did think," I said. "I thought a lot. While you were planning a cruise. While I slept beside a lawnmower. While you asked if I could give up the only place I had left." Emily crossed her arms. "You're being dramatic again." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel small. I felt done. "You never wanted me in your life. You wanted me in the background, useful, silent, disposable, and I played along, thinking it was love, but it wasn't, and now it never will be." Daniel sat down slowly, the weight of my words finally sinking. "So that's it?" he said. "Just like that?" I nodded. "Just like that." Emily turned on her heel and stormed out. Daniel sat there a minute longer, then followed. The room was quiet again. I looked at the clock. Visiting hours were almost over. I buzzed the nurse and asked for a new blanket. I was cold, but not shaking. Alone, but not abandoned. I pulled the covers over my legs, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I rested in peace. Not because I was gone, but because I was finally fully awake. Daniel showed up 2 days later at my front door, alone this time, holding a bouquet of supermarket flowers with the plastic wrap still on. I didn't open the screen door. I just looked at him through the mesh and waited. He shifted from foot to foot like a child caught lying. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked. I nodded and unlatched the screen. He stepped inside slowly, his eyes scanning the house like it was unfamiliar territory. He hadn't been here in nearly 2 years. He handed me the flowers. I set them on the table without a word. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything, for the dinner, for Emily, for the garage. I didn't see it before. I see it now." I raised an eyebrow. "What changed?" He paused, then looked down. Melissa called. She said you updated your will. She said it's done, that there's nothing I can do. I nodded once. She's right. His voice cracked a little. I didn't come here for the money. I came because I want to fix this. You came because you lost something, I said. And now you're afraid it's permanent. He didn't deny it. Just stood there, hands clenched. I made mistakes, he said. I let Emily push too hard. I didn't stop her. I didn't stand up for you. No, Daniel, I said. You didn't forget to defend me. You chose not to, over and over. He looked up, eyes glassy. I'm still your son. I shook my head slowly. You were. Then you let yourself become something else. You became someone who watched his mother eat with toddlers while his wife sat in her chair. Someone who let me live in a garage while my bedroom became a closet. Someone who planned to inherit a house while suggesting I move into assisted living like old furniture. That's not a son. That's a user. He flinched but didn't interrupt. I didn't cut you out for revenge, I said. I did it because love isn't supposed to feel like debt, and that's all you've made me feel. He stepped forward slightly. Can't we start over? I laughed once, short and quiet. Start over with what? I gave you everything. My time, my money, my trust. I have nothing left to give you that you didn't already burn through. He looked stunned. You're really done? I've been done, I said. You just didn't notice because I kept cooking, kept folding, kept showing up. But that woman? She's gone. He dropped into the chair across from me, like his knees couldn't hold him up anymore. I don't know how to fix it, he said. You can't, I replied. Some things don't get fixed. They get left behind. We sat in silence for a long minute. Then he looked up and asked, Did you leave me anything? I stood, walked to the hall closet, and pulled out a small box wrapped in brown paper. I handed it to him without ceremony. What is it? He asked. Open it, I said. He tore the paper slowly, revealing a photo album. Inside were pictures from his childhood, first birthday, school plays, beach trips. Tucked in the back was the journal we used to share, where we took turns writing notes to each other when he was too shy to say what he felt out loud. He flipped through the pages, stopped at one where he'd drawn a stick figure version of us building a treehouse. I had written underneath it, I'll always be your ladder. Climb as high as you want, and I'll catch you if you fall. His lip trembled. I remember this. I nodded. That's what you get. That's what's left. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just closed the album gently and said, I don't deserve it. No, I said. You don't. But you needed to see it, because it's the proof that I was here, that I loved you, that I tried. He stood slowly, clutching the box. I won't come back, he said. Good, I replied. Not until you're someone I'd let in again. He opened the door, looked back once, then stepped into the sunlight. I closed it behind him and locked it without hesitation. The click echoed through the house like a bell, not of ending, but of peace. I didn't hear from Daniel again after that day, and I didn't expect to. Silence had finally become more comforting than hope. The house stayed quiet, but it no longer felt empty. I started waking up early, just to sip tea by the window and let the morning light move across the walls. I rearranged the furniture, not for anyone else's comfort, just mine. I brought my old piano back into the living room, even if I only touched it once a week. Melissa visited every Sunday, like she always had. Only now, we didn't talk about the past. We planted herbs in the backyard, just the two of us, laughing when we spilled dirt on each other's shoes. She called it therapy with tomatoes. Sometimes we cooked together, and when we sat down to eat, she made sure I was at the head of the table. No declarations, no grand gestures, just respect. Real, consistent, unspoken respect. One afternoon, I mailed a small envelope to Jason. No note inside, just a copy of one of the journal entries his father wrote as a child. It was the one where Daniel had drawn stick figures of us playing catch with the caption, Mom always throws it soft so I can catch it. I didn't expect a response. I only wanted Jason to know there had been a time when his father loved me freely, when our story had started with laughter and open arms. If he ever asked about me, I wanted him to have something honest to hold on to. As for Emily, I never saw her again. Not in person. But I heard from Melissa that she'd been upset about the will for weeks, ranting about what I owed them, furious that she'd put in all that effort just to be left with nothing. I didn't react. There was nothing left in me to argue with. You can't reason with people who think love is a contract and respect is optional. I had spent too many years apologizing for being inconvenient, for aging, for needing space, for speaking gently when what I wanted to do was scream. But now, I spoke clearly. I made decisions. I cooked for myself. I rested when I was tired. And I didn't wait for invitations that were never coming. On my next birthday, Melissa brought over a tiny homemade cake with purple frosting and lavender, leaves on top. "Your color," she said, lighting a single candle. I laughed and told her, "One's enough. I'm not trying to burn the house down." We ate together in the kitchen, our chairs creaking and our stomachs full, and when she left, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for being brave." I stood at the door after she was gone, watching the wind move through the garden, and thought about all the years I gave to people who only saw me when they needed something. And then I thought about this life now. Quiet, small, but real. No pretending, no shrinking, no begging. Just me and my name, and a chair that finally belonged to me again. He took my seat once, but I never let him take my peace. That's it for today. What would you have done in her place? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I love reading what you all think. And hey, if this story hit you, check out these videos too. You won't want to miss them.